Right, so Piers Morgan is what the media are fixating on in the wake of Prince Harry's successful litigation, not against Morgan, but against the entire Mirror Group newspapers, which includes the Mirror, the Sunday Mirror and the People, winning 15 of the 33 claims against them that he brought in relation to phone hacking. Now, of course, where Piers Morgan is concerned, he has denied ever doing it or ever knowing anything about it, claiming his hands are being completely squeaky clean in the 9 years that he was the newspaper editor of the Mirror, despite the fact he is mentioned by name 83 times in the 386-page High Court Judgement. But this goes beyond just Piers Morgan, even despite the prominence in which he is mentioned, because once again it has thrust the fact our media are still allowed to mark their own homework, even after the original phone hacking scandal that brought down the news of the world took place. We need to revisit the Leveson Inquiry. We need to examine how the media got away and continue to get away with not being legislated over, and they cannot accept the fact that they can't be trusted to regulate themselves, because they simply can't be. Right, so the judgment has been handed down by High Court Justice Timothy Fancourt in the case between Prince Harry and 3 others versus Mirror Group newspapers over allegations of phone hacking, and of the 33 instances brought by the Prince, 15 have been upheld. Functionally, it means it is impossible for the Mirror Group's executives of the day, which at that time included Piers Morgan, as editor of the Mirror, to have not been aware. And Morgan has always vociferously denied any knowledge of phone hacking, of course, or being aware of it ever going on, despite having been the editor at the time of Harry's allegations, being the editor of the Mirror between 1995 and 2004. As the Prince's barrister David Sherborne said as part of a statement on behalf of his client, the court ruled that unlawful and criminal activities were carried out at all 3 Mirror Group newspaper titles, the Mirror, the Sunday Mirror and the People, on a habitual and widespread basis for over more than a decade. Morgan has threatened legal action on anyone, of course, saying he was ever involved. He's done it numerous times, not least of which on TV on his own show, or that he knew anything about what was going on. But the judgment is that he must have known, and searching his name in the 386-page judgment, what has been said in court comes up with 83 mentions of Morgan. Some notable examples from the judgment are implicating him in some form of wrongdoing, and a few examples are: phone hacking was rife at the Daily Mirror by 1999, but not so evident in April 1998. Mr. Hipwell's evidence that Mr. Morgan, editor of the Daily Mirror, knew about and took the benefit of the practice was convincing. Another example involved a conversation between Morgan and then Director of Communications at 10 Downing Street between 2000 and 2005. So under Tony Blair, involving the hacking of the phones of then England football manager Sven-Göran Eriksson and Ulrika Jonsson. He attended the Labour Party conference in Blackpool in September 2002 and remembers going out for a Chinese meal with Mr. Morgan present. He asked Mr. Morgan how the Mirror had obtained the story about Mr. Eriksson and Ms. Jonsson. He said Mr. Morgan responded by asking which network provider he used for his mobile phone and then what the default PIN code was for that network. He said that default numbers were rarely changed and that was how phone messages could be accessed remotely. Mr. Veg-Prosser said that Mr. Morgan then said that was how we got the story on Sven and Ulrika, or words to that effect, with a smile. The evidence was not challenged by Mirror Group Network and speaks for itself. David Seymour, who was group political editor of the Daily Mirror from 1993 to 2007, gave evidence about his dealings with Mr. Morgan. He said that he witnessed him at close quarters and had a close working relationship with him. He came to learn about some of the dubious methods being used to get stories in the Mirror. He said that he regarded Mr. Morgan as unreliable and boastful and apt to tell untruths when it suited him. Mr. Seymour said that on one occasion in 1996, Mr. Morgan showed him a video of a pack of paparazzi pursuing Princess Diana in the street and causing her distress by harassment, which belied a recently published article that suggested that the princess was distressed upon leaving the building of a therapist. He recalls Mr. Morgan saying, "If this gets out, we are finished." On another occasion, Mr. Seymour said that he was walking through the newsroom, probably in March 2001, and Mr. Morgan was standing in the middle holding a tape machine with reporters around him. He said, "Listen to this," and played a recording of Paul McCartney, who was singing a Beatles song, to Heather Mills in a voicemail left for her. Mr. Seymour said that he later learnt that the recording had been made or acquired by Neil Wallace, who had lent it to Mr. Morgan. The term "I think he doth protest too much" very much seems to apply to Piers Morgan here. The claims made, highlighted in the judgment, bear out the opinion that even if he was not directly involved in any form of phone hacking, Morgan clearly knew what was going on and seemingly revelled in it. Piers Morgan being distasteful and dislikable and having done things many already surmised he'd done or been aware of, despite his aggressive denials, isn't really news as such, though. Of course people are lapping it up. Of course the mainstream media are all over this angle to this story. But they're all missing the point, and very deliberately so, because if they told us what we all ought to be thinking about, they'd squeal witch hunt at us again. Because, again, we're being reminded that all of our mainstream media, with its inbuilt biases towards the wishes of their billionaire owners, is neither trustworthy nor truly informative on the things that matter, and actions to get stories such as we've seen here can't go untouched again, not acted upon. The days of the press regulating itself have got to end. The Leveson Inquiry spelt out in no uncertain terms the failures of the press in the wake of the phone hacking scandal of the News of the World back in 2011, triggering then Prime Minister David Cameron to open the first part of the Leveson Inquiry to investigate press standards in the wake of that phone hacking scandal. But he closed it a year later in 2012, and nothing functionally changed, because the Tories clearly saw the risk to themselves if their loyal media ended up with their hands being tied. Despite Leveson finding gross shortcomings, obvious shortcomings frankly, when the press had no oversight with any teeth and could act with impunity, and the fact Leveson was never actually implemented was one of the biggest travesties of political and journalistic failure in this country this century. The Tories then stood on a manifesto commitment to not push ahead with the second part of Leveson at all. Yes, you might be surprised to hear they only ever did half the job anyway, when the connection between the police and the press were due to be investigated, and how information might get leaked from the police to journalists. That's never happened, and it still has to. It really must do. The one silver lining to come from all of this failure to implement Leveson, though, was the fact that any media outlet and journalist worth their salt volunteered to sign up to Leveson levels of increased scrutiny, choosing to subject themselves to that so as to be reputably better than those who are not. And funnily enough, there is not one single mainstream major media outlet who has chosen to subscribe to that in what became the Impress press regulator. They stuck with good old marking their own homework ipso instead. You only need visit the Impress website to see the list of titles signed up to better levels of scrutinies. Examples including Squawkbox, Novara Media, Declassified UK, Bywire News and more. 127 outlets, almost exclusively independent media as they are, publishing some 212 publications between them. The biggest story here is that what has happened with the Mirror here and now is exactly what happened to the News of the World over 10 years ago, which means the effects of it are still being felt. The damage is still getting dealt with from that. And the only thing not actually getting dealt with is how all of this was allowed to happen to begin with, which is with the media being put under more scrutiny, with the need for them to be subjected to more checks and balances to ensure that these things cannot ever be repeated, because as things stand, they can. And it seems a pretty safe bet to assume that they will. Piers Morgan, all the talk of Piers Morgan, is the distraction covering up the fact that this is the actual problem that needs to be dealt with, and that it still hasn't been dealt with, that there still is no intention to deal with it because no one is talking about it again. And Piers Morgan basically just exemplifies that. We need to have this debate again now, before we're talking about the next phone hacking scandal or the technological equivalent in a few years' time. Part 2 of Leveson should absolutely go ahead, and the findings of Part 1 need putting into law, not just something to be opted into by media who want to have some sort of reputable reputation of their own. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Piers Morgan got roasted on air by Green Party co-leader Carla Denyer over Palestine after he tried to talk her down on the subject, and, well, he was made to wish that he hadn't. Couldn't happen to a nicer fella, really. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.